Okay, let's do the next chapter called The Countdown. Early the next morning, at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in the Soviet Union, Sergei Korolev stood outside a massive hangar as the door slid open. Korolev, the Soviet Union's top rocket scientist, watched his creation roll out, 112-foot long rocket on its side strapped to a platform of a flat train car. As the Bay of Pigs invasion force gathered on the beach in Nicaragua, the Soviets were set to launch a surprise mission of their own. Two of the biggest events of the entire Cold War were playing out at the exact same time. Korolev walked alongside the train tracks as the flat car moved slowly, gently from the hangar to the launch pad. This rocket, the R 7, was his masterpiece, a leap forward in rocket design. With this technology, Korolev had put the first satellite, Sputnik, into orbit. He'd sent dogs into space. He'd crashed an unmanned craft into the surface of the moon, and just weeks before, he pulled off another big step, blasting a capsule into space with a very special traveler. The flight had gone smoothly. The passenger, in a helmet and bright orange flight suit, had parachuted down near a village in the rural mountains. He'd hit the snow and collapsed, arms and legs splayed at odd angles. Startled villagers ran to the fallen figure. Was this another Frank Powers, another American sky pirate? Just in case, one man bent down and punched the stranger in the head. Nothing. No reaction. Soldiers sped up in cars, jumped out, and shoved everyone back from the body. But then the soldiers just stood there, blocking access. They didn't even bother to see if the guy was still alive. He wasn't. He never had been. The space traveler was Ivanich, an amazingly lifelike mannequin built specially for this final dress rehearsal. Scientists had filled their hollow limbs with test subjects, including mice, guinea pigs, and reptiles. The animals all came through the flight in fine shape. This was also a test of the capsule's communication system. Could a human voice be heard from space? Ivan wasn't up to the challenge of talking, so the designers had proposed adding a recording of a person singing. Soviet security officers objected, knowing Americans would be watching and listening. The West will think the cosmonaut has lost his mind, and instead of carrying out his mission, he's singing songs. They compromised using a tape of a chorus, or of a choir. No one would think that there was a choir up there. They also added a recording of a woman reading a recipe. All systems worked perfectly. Korolev had been following news of the U.S. space program. The Americans were a lot less secretive than the Russians and were clearly close to sending the first humans into space. By far the biggest prize yet in the space race, but the Soviets were about to get the first shot. Korolev and his team were now ready to strap a pilot into a tiny capsule atop of R 7 and blast him into space. Hopefully, of the last 16 R 7 launches, 8 succeeded, 8 failed. That night, in a cottage near the launch pad, a 27-year-old fighter pilot named Yuri Gagarin lay still in a wooden bunk, pretending to be asleep. Never in his life had Gagarin been more in need of a good night's sleep, but that wasn't going to happen, not tonight. 2 years before, Gagarin had been selected as one of 2,000 candidates for a job that did not yet exist. Cosmonaut, the Russian term for an astronaut. They'd all been prodded and tested, examined inside and out, and given fiendishly difficult tasks such as solving math problems while wearing headphones through which a friendly voice whispered incorrect answers. The 2,000 candidates were cut to 20. Then the test got harder. How would cosmonauts handle the massive G force they'd faced on top of an accelerating rocket? To find out, the men were belted into a centrifuge, a tiny capsule at the end of a long spinning arm. Like a carnival ride from HELL, the capsule whipped the pilots around and around until they felt they were going to be crushed, until their field of vision shrank to a narrow tunnel, until they couldn't move a muscle under the strain, couldn't breathe or even blink. How would men react in the weightlessness that would experience in orbit? To find out, they took turns riding a specially adapted elevator in Moscow's tallest building. As the escalator car fell free 30 stories, the candidates floated up to the ceiling for a moment, No one knew how a longer period of weightlessness would affect the human body. What about the loneliness a cosmonaut might feel in space? Could a human handle such utter isolation without going insane? To test this, scientists locked the cosmonauts in isolation chambers for up to 10 days at a time. After a short while inside, the candidates had no idea what time it was, whether it was day or night, whether anyone was listening to them when they talked. Yuri Gagarin did everything well. He was competitive and cool headed, focused and serious, but quick with a joke to cut the tension. That he could bend his athletic 5'3" frame into tiny spaces was also a plus. In the end, it came down to two candidates, Gagarin and German Titbos. Titbos. Gagarin was selected to attempt the first flight, and Titbos was backup. They had the exact same training. Either could make the flight. After a final day of preparation, the two cosmonauts had come back to their cottage by the launch pad ready to rest, but the doctors had been in the room. Wires snaked out of their mattresses and through a hole in the wall that hadn't been there before. The doctors were seriously going to monitor them all night from the next room, seeing who tossed and turned, who got the better night of sleep. Gagarin could still be replaced. That's why he lay still in his bunk. If he fell asleep, he might move around, making the doctors think he wasn't sleeping well, so he refused to nod off. German Titkovitz, a few feet away, was doing the exact same thing. Around 3 a.m., Sergei Korolev stepped into the cottage, gestured for the doctors to be silent, and tiptoed down the hall to the cosmonaut's bedroom. He cracked open the door and he peeked in. A lovely sight. His hand-pecked boys seemed to be sleeping like babies. 3 hours later, Gagarin, Titbos, and Korolev sat together for a breakfast of Soviet space food, brown paste from a tube. Oof. Gagarin said, "It's been ages since I've had anything so tasty." The cosmonauts stripped to their underwear and doctors attached sensors to all of their bodies. A team of technicians helped both men into bright orange pressure suits and helmets. One team member held out a piece of paper for Gagarin to sign, not on official form. He wanted the men's autograph. Gagarin and Titbos were driven to the launch pad. Titbos held out hope that some last-second glitch with Gagarin's equipment would let him, Titbos, make the historical flight. Now all he could do was wish Gagarin luck. The two friends attempted to kiss each other on the cheek in the Russian tradition, their helmets banged together. Gagarin rode an elevator 150 feet up to the top of the launch pad. Small capsule Vostok 1 sat atop the R-7 rocket. The crew helped him through the hatch. They strapped him into the seat and plugged in his oxygen and pressure hoses. The clamped cabin had 3 small portals, radio equipment, and instrument panels. It was a lot simpler than the MiG fighter jet Gagarin was used to flying, and that was by design. He wasn't supposed to touch the controls. Scientists were generally worried about what they would call space madness. Even after all the testing, they had no idea how a human would actually handle the stress of space flight, so they triggered everything to work automatically. Gagarin could take manual control only by typing in a special 3-digit code, a code he wasn't supposed to know. In case of emergency, the code would be radioed up from ground control. One of the technicians, Oleg Ivansky, broke the rules at the last moment. "Yura," he whispered, using Gagarin's nickname. "The numbers are 3, 2, 5. Gagarin flashed that reassuring smile everyone had come to love, and Korolev had already told him. Complete silence in the control room, Anatoly Simonov announced into the microphone. Sees all conversations. He immediately felt like an idiot. No one was even talking about him. Simonov, one of Korolev's top rocket scientists, started the countdown. In their bomb-proof control bunker, protection against the very real possibility that the rocket could explode and land on them, Sergei Korolev and his team sat at the consoles watching screens and gauges. Doctors could see that Gagarin's blood pressure was normal. Temperature is normal. His pulse, incredibly, was a steady 64. Over the radio, they could hear the man whistling a pop song. Whistling. 1 minute to take off. Sergei Korolev tried, without success, to hide the strain in his voice. 1 minute to take off, he told Gagarin over the radio. You heard? I read you. Gagarin's pulse rose to 109. He was human, after all. During the launch, you need not answer me, Korolev said. Answer when you can, though, as I'm going to be transmitting details. I read you, Gagarin responded. I feel fine and am ready to go. We're boosting pressure and the cabin mast has been removed. I felt it. I can hear the valves working. Ignition beginning, pre-stage, immediate stage, main stage, liftoff. White flames burst from the base of the R7. An almost musical blend of roars and rumbles filled the capsule as Gagarin felt the rocket beneath him trembling, fighting gravity, and lifting off the ground. His pulse hit 157. Pogalski, he shouted. Russian, let's go!